Hello, and welcome back to Get Wrecked. I am one of your hosts, Stephen Falgu.
And I am your other host, Louis Falgu.
Welcome, Louis, to the show.
It's my first time.
I know you're a long-time listener, first-time caller on the show today. We appreciate having you. This is a show I do with my brother. It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
But
he actually, Steven's brother is actually not here today. That's why I'm filling in for him.
Yeah. This is Louis, spelled Lewis, is who we have here as the guest of the show.
and from a different Falgu family.
Right.
But it's a very odd coincidence. In fact, I find it a little strange and rather funny that Steven decided to seek out another Louis Falgu to fill in Louis Falgu. But sometimes
I put a Craigslist offer out there. I was like, hey, anyone have any good recs for different Louis Falgus?
I see. That's why my introduction to the show was very shady.
Yeah. So, here we are again, about to talk about some things,
some remakes.
As you will find out throughout the course of the show, how the show works.
We talk about things.
I hope you're ready.
Last episode we were given remakes because it was almost Easter, but it wasn't. It was April Tool's Day instead.
Yes, it was April Tool's Day. So this is a special episode of Get Wrecked. One that we called something, I'm sure, but I forgot now. So
remake.
We'll call it
remakes. We're calling
this. This is Get Wrecked in parentheses 2018 is this episode of Get Wrecked because it's the reboot.
I see. Yes, I like.
So
that.
that's for purposes of putting it in the vaults later, so that way people won't get confused.
That's solid.
Yeah. All right. I think let's jump into it. I think why don't you go ahead and kick us off here with what I had recommended to you, and we can start talking about that.
I don't think that should be first because I think that is the bigger event. I feel like...
Wow, okay. So first time on the show and already making some...
I'm making some demands.
Taking control.
But I very much believe that we should go into your recommendation.
Okay, let's do
it. Or my
then.
Recommendation, I suppose. Or
yes.
I'm not going to stick up with that the whole episode. My recommendation from last time was How the Grinch...
Oh, Louis! Hey, welcome back!
Oh, I'm back! Hey, that was really weird. The guy you found to replace me looked identical to me and sounded remarkably similar to me.
Yeah, and all of our podcast listeners, they could just tell how similar he looked, too. It was crazy.
Yeah, exactly. That was a good that was a good find on your end. But now I'm back, and I gave you a rec last week. For How the Grinch Stole Christmas, there was obviously the TV cartoon from 1966, and then there was the remake in 2000, and we will begin by talking about the cartoon TV special from 1966 that I'm sure everyone has seen. And Stephen, I'll just let you go ahead.
Well, actually, first of all, this rec was a themed rec on themed rec. So we were not only doing remake and reboot, but this one was also the wrong holiday.
Yeah, I forgot what holiday.
Tell you, watching How the Grinch Stole Christmas in April was an interesting experience. Got me in the Christmas spirit. Christmas comes earlier every year, so I'm hoping to be able to buy my ornaments next month. I'm actually gonna flip the script here, just like we did with whose rec goes first. But I'm gonna flip the script here because I'm gonna talk about them in the order that I watched them.
Okay.
And I actually watched the live action, the newer one first.
All right, well, I'll put that up then.
So I'm going to start there because some of the things that I have to say about the cartoon were influenced by me having just watched the live action one. Okay. So this film stars Jim Carrey as the titular Grinch. I think that one of the first things that jumped out to me was I was like, they were building up and they were playing Where Are You Christmas, which I also learned apparently came from this movie.
It did, yeah.
So that was another little surprise, but they were playing that, and you were seeing all the Who's down in Whoville. And then I saw directed by, and I was like, oh, this should be a treat. Who directed this trailer?
I know.
Freaking Ron Howard directed the live action Grinch. So that makes me really excited for Solo.
Solo, a
which
Star Wars
also
movie,
being directed by Ron Howard, because what a treasure this film is, live action Grinch. I want to say, okay, just talking broadly about this film, I don't understand why a modern reboot of a classic has to. Okay, I shouldn't say I don't understand. I do understand, but why? You have your pop culture references. You have it's not super chock full of those, but you do get like all your farts and burps humor, which all the kiddies just love. What's the point? I don't get it. It does not add anything. It does not make any scene more humorous. I'm sure kids who are going to see this probably got a chuckle out of these things, but it's just like they betray oftentimes the character with just this gross, and the character of the Grinch is always kind of a shit, right? Mm-hmm. But this one is a total tool. And even when he gets redeemed, quote unquote, he's still just a shit. Like, he is worse.
Yeah.
Like, his heart grows 3 sizes, which I'll get to that scene. Oh Lord.
Jesus
but his heart grows 3 sizes, and then he's cutting the roast beast. And he's like, I'm going to take the first piece. Ha, fuck you, kids. I'm still the great bitch.
It does kind of seem to entirely defeat the purpose of the entire story, doesn't it? I mean, like, no, I won't go there. You said you wanted to get there later. Well,
yeah, so I guess, I mean, all right. So if I were to boil down the theme of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, I want to ask you something, because this movie tried to do something that I thought was interesting. I don't think I like the direction that they took it, but I did think it was interesting, because at the end of the day, I think the theme of How the Grinch Stole Christmas is about more than the materialistic goods and everything around the holiday. Christmas is about being together and celebrating. Christmas is about a little bit more, right? I mean, the story even says so.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing about the live action Grinch. So in the original, and I won't even talk about either of these two movies. I'll go to like the original story, right? The book. Mm-hmm. And it compares both of these a little bit to that.
Right.
So in the book, the whole story revolves around the Grinch, pretty much entirely. And the Grinch is the one who has to learn that about Christmas. Well, in this movie, the Grinch has to learn that about Christmas, but also the Who's have to learn that about Christmas. And I don't really know how I felt about that. I feel like it becomes sort of counter to the... I wouldn't say it's counter to the theme. I mean, that's still in line with the theme. But the Grinch learns about Christmas through the eyes of the Who's, who already sort of understand that Christmas is about more than just like purchasing gifts and giving it and like, you know, lights and everything. Well, in this movie, the Who's also have to, because like only Cindy Lou is the one who sees that Christmas is about family and the spirit of the holiday. All the Who's are just like equally terrible and greedy. And there's like, I think one of the first scenes of the film is there's like store sales everywhere, and like all the Who's are going to the closest store to get the sales. Right. So I don't think it's counter to the theme. Obviously it's in line with the theme, but I don't really see what it adds.
Well, I'll tell you what it adds. It adds filler, because what we've got is an hour and a half long movie that needs to extend. Like, the thing that benefits the cartoon, and of course we'll get to it, is that it's so short. It's like 30 minutes at that, and that's like, well, 30 minutes cut for commercials, so more like 20, right? And so it's right to the point. And you know, one thing about Dr. Seuss that I think always has made him stand out from other children's authors is like his and of course, children's books are always remarkably simple, but it was just that Seuss could manage to craft these just like insanely simple stories, but yet, be able to weave something very subtly heartwarming through that. It never felt like it was dumbed down. If anything, it feels dumbed down when you add the extra elements into it. Because at that point, why even have the Grinch? Like, the mayor of the town is already the Grinch. So
he is also the Grinch.
Yeah, so why is the Grinch there? Like, the whole point of the Grinch looking so different and, acting so different is to immediately separate in your mind, oh, this is the one who hates Christmas, and he has to learn from these, little innocent who's. And maybe that's not the most realistic of stories, but I don't think it matters because it gets the point across very, very simply. And, I understand that with the length of this film, you really couldn't do that, but that's really not a blessing. That's a curse. That's why this should not be turned into an hour-and-a-half movie,
So I want to go back to the point you made about filler, because I will say, and there were definitely scenes that were just straight filler. Like, at one point, Cindy Lou's mom is like putting up lights and they're competing with the next door neighbor who is this like really weird lady who's way into the Grinch, and there are really adult themes between her and the Grinch, which I did not enjoy
very awful
at all. But anyway, there is literally a point, it's like an hour into this movie, where everything that happened up until that point had no effect on the story. Like, they have an hour of movie from the beginning of the movie to like an hour or so in, where then the movie kicks back into the original story of the Grinch. Yeah. And the reason why it was so, like, it stood out so much to me,
jarring, I think is the word here,
was, okay, in the first hour, I actually kind of enjoyed. Okay, so I talked about the Who's having to find out Christmas. I don't think that really worked at all, but I do like Cindy Lou becoming more of a character and having interacted with the Grinch and being the one who's like starting to get the Grinch to a point of having a transition, right? Mm-hmm. Because the one thing about the original story is the Grinch does go from like hating Christmas to loving Christmas almost immediately. Now, it totally works. It's simple, but I do like that, if you're going to give that much more film dedicated to this story, having a character there that sees him for what he can be and tries to get him to understand Christmas, I did enjoy that, actually. But what happens then is the Grinch gets his master plan. Everyone knows it. He puts on the Santa gear. He goes and he steals Christmas. He goes to Cindy Lou's house. Cindy Lou sees him, the Grinch, who she had multiple interactions with, and neither of them even recognize each other. It's like they don't even know the other exists. So literally everything that happened before that point, it was nothing. Like, it got them nowhere, either of the characters.
Yep.
The only thing that we learn in that first hour is this horrendous backstory of the Grinch that does not need to be there. It doesn't add anything to the character. I as a viewer of this story don't care why the Grinch hates Christmas. We just need to know that he does.
Can we talk about that real quick, by the way? Because it's not even just that the backstory doesn't need to be there, but if it's gonna be there, why does it have to make so little sense? Little sense. It's like, okay, so I get it, right? He was a different kid and he was bullied, but it's not even like handled that way. Like, what? There's the scene where we see him get bullied is because he cut himself shaving, and like all the kids are like, haha, the Grinch cut himself shaving. The green kid cut himself shaving. And it's like, this is the memory you guys concocted for the Grinch's horrible backstory. And
it would be one thing. It would be one thing if it was just the kids, right? Okay, I guess it could be funny. I don't really know. But then the teacher starts laughing too.
Yeah. Everybody.
Like, why would you find that funny? Like, what? And he's like putting a bag over his head. Like, I thought he was gonna like really have messed himself up or messed his like hair up real bad or something. No, it's just like he has a couple tissues where he nicked himself.
Exactly.
And that was it.
It's so stupid.
The kid who ends up being the bully, by the way, does become the mayor, who is Jeffrey Tambor, I believe, plays the mayor. And you already mentioned it, but it's just like he is just the second Grinch. Like he is just another Grinch, and it's like why?
Yeah.
It does, and he's like this terrible person, and he hates the Grinch, and he's the reason why the Grinch hates Christmas. They tried to build a world around the character the Grinch, but it was just boring. And why? I don't understand what it serves. It doesn't serve anything. It doesn't make any sense. And also, I will say they talk about like how the Who's are born or whatever, and it's like they all float in from a basket, and also the Grinch did for some reason.
Yeah.
And then like these old ladies care for him, and then one of the baskets goes in front of somebody's house, and the guy is like, "Oh, this one looks a lot like your boss," and I was like, "Oh my god." Really? You're gonna do that?
You know what so one thing we haven't touched on yet, that there are two major issues I have with this film beyond all the stuff we already talked about, which, don't get me wrong, all that stuff, total crap. But there are two major elements in this film that make it, to me, one of the most horrific and unbearable experiences in film history. You know, I'll give it credit. It's probably not as bad as the Cat in the Hat movie, although I haven't seen that, and I don't plan to. But one of those two things that I think we should begin touching on is the look of the film. And I mean, absolutely everything about the look of the film is just horrendous. So every fucking camera angle is god awful. How many angular shots do you need to fill into one movie? Like, so many, like the camera's on its side, or it's like tilted weirdly, or it's fucking like right up to somebody's face all the time. The whole movie looks foggy. The costume design is disgusting. I think the Who's make me want to puke. You know, I get the Grinch should look gross. I understand that. But the main characters look terrible. The set design is all right, but this film has this issue of trying to shove a cartoon and a movie together. And I will give it credit, for a movie that does that, at least it didn't put a CGI cartoon character in with all the live action stuff. I'll give it credit for that. But at the same time, these two worlds just, they rarely intersect well, right? Like, think about the movies where this has worked. Roger Rabbit. Well, what's unique about Roger Rabbit? Well, the cartoon characters are actually cartoons. You know, in this movie, everybody's a cartoon character, but they're human beings. Like, have you ever seen those like Photoshop pictures where they try to make cartoon characters in real life?
Yeah.
And it always looks terrifying.
Yeah.
That is this entire film.
Yeah, I did want to talk about the designs, because one of the first things I wrote in my notes is the Who designs are just disgusting.
Yeah, I know.
Like, they look bad, and in a way that is, and then the thing that really got me is, it's like, okay, if you're gonna make a really bad design, at least go for it. There are characters in this film who do not have the same gross nose. Like, there are Who's that are just like regular people faces. Like that lady who falls in love with the Grinch. She didn't even put the makeup on. So it's like, you're not even committing to it. At least commit to your terrible design decision for these Who's. I will say, though, I do like the design of the Grinch. I actually do. But the one thing I will say is, what is with Jim Carrey's faces? Like, for whatever reason, and I know you've seen the film, like, and so you'll probably know what I'm talking about, but Jim Carrey does this thing where he like scrunches his mouth to the side.
Yeah.
for like 95% of the film.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I don't get it at all.
His entire face, it looks like there are like two invisible hands like squishing
Yeah.
it around the whole time.
Yeah, like one really strong grandma is just like pulling up one cheek his whole.
Well, so you're already touching on it. Let's just get into it. The other thing that makes this film unbearable for me is Jim Carrey's performance. And seeing as he is, I mean, he is the central star of the film, right? Like, there are other main characters, but we're here for the Grinch. Even in the original, you're there for the Grinch. And Jim Carrey, there are scenes where Jim Carrey is alone. And we have to watch Jim Carrey portray what the Grinch does when he is alone. And these scenes are vomit-inducing. I mean, you know, scratch it. Every scene that the Grinch is in is vomit-inducing. I mean, God, way to just suck all of the heart out of this story, right? Like, by putting him in this, every scene that would otherwise have some heart, including the scene where his heart literally crows, is absolutely just destroyed. And look, full disclosure, I don't like Jim Carrey. I haven't seen any of his dramatic, serious performances, which I've heard are very good. But all of his comedic performances that I've seen, I just absolutely hate. And I know he's kind of a love it or hate it kind of thing, so I understand that. But even people who like Jim Carrey, a lot of those people will still point to this movie as like one of his lowest lows. And I mean, I understand. Like, even if you like Jim Carrey, he's got to be too much for you here.
Yeah, Jim Carrey's Grinch is just a straight creeper throughout this movie. I mean, he is like eating glass. He's like kind of sensually talking to children at some points, which I did not enjoy.
That's true.
He also just starts like basically talking about murdering kids. He gives a hacksaw to kids at one point and encourages them to go and run with it. All while having that grandma pinch face on. It's just so bad. And then, okay, because we've mentioned it a couple times here, I'm going to skip to the heart growing 3 sizes because that is one of the worst scenes I think I have experienced because it stretches on too long. So let me kind of give my synopsis of this scene. So for those who may not have seen The Grinch ever, sorry, spoiler alert, but his heart was too small in the story. That was one of the reasons why they think maybe the Grinch didn't like Christmas. Well, when he finally realizes that Christmas is more than just presents and everything, his heart grows 3 sizes. And we'll get to the cartoon version, which I think is the right way to portray that. And then there's this version. So Jim Carrey's heart grows 3 sizes, and Jim Carrey's rendition of a heart growing 3 sizes is this obnoxious falling on the floor. Ugh,
Yeah, just in excruciating pain, like
flipping over, rolling around for way too long, and it just keeps going.
Like, why? I mean, okay, it might have been Jim Carrey who thought that this was a good idea, but something tells me it was somebody else. I mean, I
hope it wasn't Ron Howard.
I think it was, you know what, here's what it was. It was the director said, here, make your heart grows 3 sizes, now do your thing, Jim Carrey. And Jim Carrey's like, okay, because isn't the whole point that when you're watching this scene, it's supposed to be like heartwarming, you know? It's like, oh, this is real, like this movie tries to do 2 heartwarming scenes in a row, because you have the dad being like, it's about more than Christmas. And then the next scene, you know, the Grinch's heart grows. This is the heartwarming thing. And the Grinch is like, he's doing this like physical comedy, like he's just being absolutely destroyed from the inside. And it's just, it kills. And then right after, they have the audacity to still try to make it heartwarming. You know, like right after we just watch the Grinch flop around and scream in agony, he's like, oh, now I feel Christmas is about, like, no, you don't get to do both. You don't get to do both.
Yeah. And I want to, so while we're on the Grinch himself, I want to mention a line that I wrote down. So the Grinch, he gets all the presents, his heart grows 3 sizes, and just a beautiful scene on film. He then goes and he gets his sleigh which is rocket powered. Cindy Lou joins him, and they take the sleigh back down to Whoville to give everyone their toys back. And the Grinch joins them. Well, I want to go ahead and read you off a quote from the film while they are going down the mountain back to Whoville. Hold on, I have to really get in character for this one. Okay, this is from The Grinch. This is hi, Lewis. I'm here today to give you a read of Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Oh boy.
I'll be performing Jim Carrey's The Grinch. The sun is bright and the powder is bitchin'. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. That was me as Jim Carrey's The Grinch after the heartwarming scene of his heart growing 3 sizes.
Heart destroying scene.
Oh man, this film is bad. It's very bad from top to bottom. I also want to mention, because we were talking about the designs, the baby Grinch is a monstrosity.
Yeah,
that thing will haunt my nightmares.
I know.
It reminded me of the baby dinosaur from the old dinosaur show, but like 10 times worse and creepier. Oh, it was like this weird animatronic thing. It is just the pits.
Yeah.
So I want to mention one last thing, because I kind of touched on how, like, after about an hour or so, this film kicks back into the original story. So the one thing about this film, and I don't think a Dr. Seuss film has to rhyme, but Dr. Seuss's stories were built on rhyme. This film does not rhyme. It does not try to rhyme until it kicks back into the original story, at which point the narrator, who's for whatever reason Anthony Hopkins, that he signed on to play this.
Hey, that brings it all around.
The narrator and the Grinch, like, scene for scene, reenact the book when I believe at this point this is when the Grinch is thinking up like what he can do to sabotage Christmas. Well, when they do that in this film, the original feels so out of character that they try to get back to it, and it is just painful to watch. And then they have the nerve. So it's like, okay, I'll give you, go back to some original lines, get back to the rhymes. That's fine, I guess. It's not in the character or the voice of this film at all, but whatever. Then they have the nerve. Jim Carrey out loud says, "What am I doing? I'm even speaking in rhyme now." Ugh. And then, okay, it's like, okay, you say that for the gag and then you get out of it, right? You don't rhyme anymore. No. Then he says that, and then they just continue verbatim the story in rhyme.
Jesus Christ.
At that point, I was like, okay, this film sucks. Also,
at that point.
Yeah, at that point, I was finally like, okay, yeah, this film does suck. I want to mention just some offhand things, and then I'll let you give any other thoughts you have on this masterpiece. Apparently, the Who's have jury duty.
Yeah, that's right.
At one point, they're like throwing the Grinch is like sabotaging their Christmas letters and by giving them jury duty.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to know about we got a little bit into the backstory of the Who's
the politics,
of their justice system. Yeah, their politics and
justice
justice system, which is great. I have here written down, looks just like your Boss Baby joke. I don't know what that is, but that sounded great, whatever that was. So if anyone's watching this at home, look out for the scene that's just like Boss Baby. Okay, yeah, that's what I have. You have any other final thoughts on this one?
Disgusting.
I mean, in every way.
That's all I
at one part I wrote down that he like takes a fruit and just rubs it under his armpits.
Yep.
Like eats glass. It's just gross to watch.
But I think we'll go into the cartoon. But Steven, give your final thoughts. Your score. You're very finish up on this movie. We can go into the cartoon and discuss the differences there.
I would give this film probably. I think so out of a 10, I would probably give it a 3. I mean, I think that it's very bad. I don't think it works. I don't think that it hits the intention or the theme of what the story is really, but I will say that I think I mentioned this, I did kind of like what they were trying to do with Cindy Lou and having this character, this character who like embodied the innocence of Christmas to help the Grinch understand the point, but it really fell flat. It didn't go anywhere. So that's the only reason why I would bump up the score even a little bit. Everything else, the design, the world that they tried to create, and the backstory that they tried to give to these characters was just at best boring, at worst confusing. Do not watch this if you want to see Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Yeah, I'll give this a 2, maybe a 2.5, I guess, if I'm being generous. I mean, it really is just like this. Thinking about this movie the whole thing looks like a fever dream. Like I said, the whole thing looks foggy. So even when you get like some good set design, because I mean the set's fine, you know, but you have.
Yeah, I do think the sets actually reminded me a lot of like Islands of Adventure.
Yeah.
The Universal Park, where they have like a Dr. Seuss world. And I mean, a lot of the sets and the buildings do look like they come out of the book, but that's about the only thing.
Yeah, but then you try to make the humans look like they came out of the book and it looks atrocious. So it's just not a good balancing act. This movie is just absolute pain from start to finish. It's annoying. It's disgusting. Jim Carrey fucking gets on my nerves in every scene. It doesn't know what it wants to be. It doesn't know how it wants to present this story. I don't even think it cares to present this story. It's just a disaster. It has its fans. I have found that. It has its fans, and good on you. I mean, if this is your pick for Christmas, every time Christmas comes around, then, you know, have fun. But
yes, Christmas is about a little bit more, Lewis, than good or bad films.
You're right. It's about Jim Carrey. Let me put it this way, right? If you want to,
my heart is growing 3 sizes.
If you want me to here's my recommendation. Look at the poster that I'm showing on screen right now. If this looks like a funny romp, then go see it. But
yeah, although what you should have done is you should have doctored his mouth to kind of be up and to the left a little bit more, because that would have been more accurate.
That would have, yeah. All right, so then normally I would have wanted to do this the original and then the remake, but Steven, I'm sure you have a reason for picking the second, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say just the only reason why I actually watched this one second was because I've seen this so many times. I mean, it's a classic, and I hadn't seen the other one as recently, so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of flip it, because I didn't want to go in with the bias of having seen the one that I think more people would consider to be good. I wanted to kind of go in from what probably more people would consider to be bad, and then see how that might have influenced my thoughts on this one. I have some random notes that were just kind of funny to me as I was watching this again, but the one thing that I'll note about this, so first of all, this film was Chuck something, right? Animator Chuck.
I know what you're talking about, but
he was known for like Droopy Dog and a lot of the old classics.
I can actually look that up for you right now.
Yeah, take a look. I will say the one thing about this is that so to be fair, it is much easier to adapt a book that is hand illustrated into an animated feature, right? So I will say that this feels more like the original Dr. Seuss, but it's not like that was like a stretch, you know, but visually. But what I will say is that every portion of this feels much closer to the Dr. Seuss book than the live action film. So if we don't think about the visual design, because a lot of that visual design work was a portion of Dr. Seuss's illustration, but things like the songs. So all the songs are new to this film, and they feel like they came directly out of Dr. Seuss's mouth, as well as the animation. The way that the characters animate feel very whimsical, but you have the whimsy of the Who's and Max, but then you have kind of this slithering menace of the Grinch, and it all feels very Seuss-like. I think that cannot be understated because the live action film does not do that in any way.
Yeah.
And we just talked about it. Nothing about that film feels like, if Dr. Seuss saw that film, I don't think that he would have been especially happy with the way that it turned out. I'll think back, and so as I'm looking at what you have up there, just thinking back to what I feel like is one of the more iconic scenes of the animated version is when the Grinch, in a just close-up headshot, is getting this idea in his brain to dress up like Santa Claus to sabotage Christmas, and this smirk on his face just continues to grow and grow all the way up his face, and he just has this scrunching menace, and it's brilliant because, one, it feels very Seuss-like, and two, it starts to give you a little bit of the sense and the nuance of the character, I would say, because the character of the Grinch, then you could see like he's menacing, and but he's grumpy, whereas the live action version was menacing, annoying, and just an absolute shit top to bottom. Right? The Grinch, he just really hates Christmas.
Yeah.
But he does have his pleasures in life, and one of those happens to be thinking about how to sabotage Christmas. And so as you see the Grinch like start to smile in this like weird, creepy way, you can start to understand that this character, like, he has a heart, right? And he probably will eventually be able to understand what the point of Christmas is. So that is one of the things that I wanted to stress, and one of the things that I immediately picked up on watching this was just how much every part of this film felt like Seuss. I mean, even the rhymes of the songs feel very Seuss-like. Seuss had a really brilliant way, I think, of like creating these crazy, weird worlds where, like, you would have like flugelhorns and Zoopy's apples or whatever, but you never questioned it.
Yeah.
And the same thing comes up in the Grinch, the song that Karloff sings. Plus, the other thing is Boris Karloff, both in narration and as the Grinch, is just so much more pleasant to listen to than Jim Carrey.
Oh, he was such a fucking gift.
It's like night and day.
I love him. Yeah, so yes, the animator, or the director and animator, Chuck Jones. That's who you're thinking of. Yep. And yeah, I mean, his style's iconic, and you know, I don't watch this much because I tend to not watch any of the specials on Christmas. I just, you know, when you see them so many times, but there is a lot to appreciate here, and I think it's to me, just I think of this film, and I think of just the absolutely wonderful animation, you know, and a lot of that credit has to go, and you were saying it's so similar to the illustrations in the book, so a lot of that credit has to go to them too. It's like the people who were illustrating for Seuss, or was Seuss illustrating? I think he might have been the illustrator. I think he was, actually, wasn't he? Anyway, the illustrations in the original Seuss books are so spot on with the stories that he tells and his style that, like, when it's so easy to translate that into a cartoon like this, and not so easy, as has been proven multiple times, to translate into a film. Or a CG film, for that matter. Maybe we'll go there someday.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
In fact, Grinch, How the Grinch Stole Christmas will be remade again by the same studio that remade The Lorax.
Yeah, I was gonna hold that one off to the end, but yes, everyone look forward. I think this year, Illumination.
Oh,
I watched to actually wrap up my viewing of both of these movies. I watched the most recent trailer for that Grinch movie, and let me tell you, boy, am I excited. Also, Benedict Cumberbatch plays the Grinch for some reason.
Whatever, though. Yeah, I don't have much to say. I think this one's kind of an obvious one. This is a very, very... It's a Christmas classic because it embodies the spirit better than... I mean, even most of the fucking Christmas specials I don't think work as well as this. Like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or, you know, Santa Claus is Coming, or any of that stuff. I think this thing is just... This thing is very great. I think it probably is my favorite Christmas special. probably.
Yeah, I think for me it would definitely be up there as well.
So
So the other things I wanted to talk about, I think this, I I wanted mainly to reflect on this one after having seen the live action one. This one's been talked about so much, and we just did it as well. So I wanted to point out some things that I thought were kind of funny as I was viewing this. So it opens up with them singing the Fahu Dore song, which was kind of weird actually. That song appears a lot more in this movie than I thought. In fact, at one point, there's even like this weird stretch of filler where they're just singing the song in a like. So there's the one that everyone remembers at the end, which is like them singing the song in the circle with the Grinch. But there's also a part in the middle where they're just kind of singing it for a little while, and it almost feels like they were just trying to stretch to get to the commercial break, because the commercial break happened like pretty much right after that.
very possible.
And I had like definitely noticed it this time. But my favorite was at the beginning. They're all singing Fahu Doris in a circle around a Christmas tree before axing it down. So they were like singing this like ritual to the tree that they murdered, which I thought was pretty funny.
It's a murder ballad.
A murder ballad, yeah. So Fahu Doris, everyone. The one thing that I actually, after having watched this one, thinking back to the live action one, there were 2 points that stuck out to me. So one was, all right, so the Grinch comes through the town and steals everybody's stuff, like literally everything, right? Leaves pretty much nothing besides like all their furniture and stuff, but everything Christmas related and all the presents. So in the live action version, actually, they have a short scene that makes a lot of sense. The Who's come out and they're like, where the hell's all our stuff? Like, somebody stole our stuff. Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
Like, to get the whole, like, okay, yeah, they are, like, they know the Who's as a town, well, not in the live action version, but the Who's as a town kind of know that Christmas means more than all their stuff. But, I mean, also just the shock of, like, someone having come through your house and stolen everything.
Yeah.
Live action version, I actually logged back as like, oh, okay, yeah. This one, no, there's like no mention that literally their whole house, every single one of their houses was ransacked. Now, you could make the case that it's implied that they probably had some shock waking up and nothing was there, but they all got together. Yeah. But I actually thought it was kind of weird having seen that after having watched the live action film where it was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I think people would be freaked out that all their stuff was stolen, even if they know that Christmas doesn't mean that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing that I mentioned that I thought was interesting after having watched the live action version was that in this version, what does Cindy Lou really bring to the story here? Because Cindy Lou wakes up, she sees Santa Claus, who's not really Santa Claus, it's the Grinch, and she goes, Santa Claus, why are you taking our tree? And then he has to like concoct a strategy. He's like, I saw a thing was missing on it. I'm going to fix it up and bring it right back. Cindy Lou, go back to bed. And that's the only interaction these characters have in the original Seuss book and here. And it really doesn't do anything to the tale, right? If he had never interacted with Cindy Lou, nothing would have changed, because it was not his interaction with Cindy Lou that really made him start to think about Christmas or make him feel bad. It was like the Who's as a town coming together after he did the thing that he did that made him feel that way. So I guess you could, on a sense, you could say, well, it showed that he was like very uncaring and like kind of a bad dude before. Yeah, I don't know. I think because having watched the live action film, where actually like I mentioned, I did think it was kind of interesting using Cindy Lou as a way to like start to get the Grinch to understand Christmas and to start to like open his heart up. Having then watched this, where like Cindy Lou really, there's no reason for her even to be there. It was just kind of something that I had noted in this time around.
Well, I think I will say that scene is fantastic, but and that's definitely the standout scene of the movie. But I or the special, I guess. But I guess you're right. It really doesn't serve much purpose. I suppose it's able to it's a good contrast in the scene itself, because otherwise you just have him walking around stealing stuff. I think to have the kid come up and to see the Grinch have to interact with the kid, it does. I think it does kind of, it puts into perspective the difference in worldview and mindset that the Grinch has versus the Who's. They're so starry-eyed and like everything's nice, and he's so cynical, and so he could just happily take this tree and lie to this little girl who's like, "Oh, you're bringing presents." You would almost expect him to turn around at that scene. I think it's funny how he doesn't. But, to bring it back to the remake, like you said, the remake, by this point, that stops mattering anyway, and this scene just reverts back to its original form, and him having met Cindy Lou there really didn't change anything either, so...
Right.
So, I mean, neither of them really did this in the best way, but maybe it's the book to blame for that, or perhaps it's translating this from the book. You notice that a lot more because, again, even though this is only 20 minutes, you still have to pad it.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's always going to be the problem when you kind of do stuff with these Seuss books, except for the Lorax special, which is wonderful. But I can't think of one that I prefer to that. But anyway, I think we should wrap this up so we can move on to Westworld, which I think more people are probably going to care about.
Yep. So after having watched this, like I mentioned, I watched the trailer for the new Illumination one, and man, I'm just so excited for all the bananas and the minions in it. So can't wait for that.
It probably won't be worse. It probably won't be worse than their Lorax adaptation. But I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them.
And the other thing I did after watching this is I went back and I watched a thing that was like a read through of the book, and this pretty much follows it beat to beat. I think there's like one or two things that I had caught that were a little different from the book than from this special, but for the most part, I mean, it was pretty much a direct adaptation, and I think that the adaptation is wonderful, and I think just the core story is great as well. So if I were to give this one a rating, that's an interesting one, because it is probably one of, if not my favorite Christmas specials. Gosh, I guess probably be around an 8 or a 9 is where I would place it. I think I think what you mentioned at the onset of this is that it is short and sweet. It does not overstay its welcome. It gets the point across, it gets the theme across, and then it's just so well animated. I think probably to me the two iconic scenes are like the smile one, and then also like when he's slithering around in the house and like he looks like exactly like a snake. I think that's great as well.
Yeah. I mean, when comparing this to the other film, I think the easiest thing to say is that this is not horrifically annoying, so immediately this one gets a plus. I don't really love any of these Christmas specials. This being my favorite doesn't really say much. I haven't seen it in a while, to be fair to it, so I think I'd probably sit around a 7, but maybe an 8. I don't know. It's a very warm movie. It's a very nice movie, and there's nothing annoying about it. It's nice. It's sweet. It's a good story at its core. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So which Grinch is the better Grinch, Steven?
On this Get Wrecked parentheses 2018 parentheses episode, I have to give it to How the Grinch Stole Christmas parentheses 1966 and parentheses.
Yeah, me too. All right, if anybody...
I think top to bottom, for me, the biggest thing about this one is it doesn't have Jim Carrey in it.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that really is all it takes, isn't it?
But weirdly enough, it does have Molly Shannon, which I thought was an odd choice because she wasn't alive yet either, probably.
Yeah, that was kind of weird.
But anyway.
All right,
let's move on.
So, Steven, why don't you go ahead and introduce what you recommended to me?
Okay, so I recommended to you Westworld, which is, I guess, kind of a little, also an interesting themed rec sort of a thing as well, because this one crosses media types. The original Westworld was a 1973 Michael Crichton film, which he directed and wrote. And then the newer version is a TV show now on HBO, which I think began airing last year, and their second season is starting up this year.
2016. The entire season 1 was at the end of 2016. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. 2016.
Took like a whole year break. But yeah, so I watched the movie first.
Okay.
And I, honestly, I knew the general concept behind Westworld, I think, but I really knew very little about what this was or how this was going to play out or anything like that. So I went in fairly blind beyond having heard that the TV show is really good. In fact, I wasn't even aware that there was a movie. So that's how little I knew about this. So Michael Crichton, obviously the writer of Jurassic Park, and, he didn't direct the film Jurassic Park. I'm kind of glad he didn't. But I will say Westworld is basically like a more primitive Jurassic Park. The story is remarkably similar. Given that I believe Crichton wrote Jurassic Park after this, he was either a bit of a one-trick pony, or he just really liked the concept of a theme park killing people. I don't know.
Maybe this was he was still workshopping the idea, so...
Yeah, maybe he just
like draft one.
He was like, this is nice, but I think dinosaurs eating people might be better. And real dinosaurs, no less. I mean, yeah, there are differences, but it's a very similar concept. So in this film, and I won't put up any God, is that even a spoiler? I guess that's whatever. I didn't put up.
It's hard to say. With both of these, the spoiler tags, I might have to just go over the whole.
I'll put this one up. So anyway, we're into spoilers. If you don't want to hear spoilers, then don't watch. So in this film, so the concept is, there's this theme park. There's this theme park. It's sort of like a Disney World in this film, because there are like 3 different parks. There's Westworld, Medieval World, and like Roman World. Obviously, Westworld is the only name of those 3 that doesn't sound fucking terrible. Like, what? Let's go to Medieval World. Like, okay, but everyone, you go into these worlds, and it's basically like what that new fucking Disney World hotel's gonna be, except with a bunch of AIs. So like, it's like a live role play basically, and the theme park is, and everyone there is a highly advanced AI robot that looks incredibly similar to humans to the point where you can't even tell them apart. In this film, you can tell them apart because you can see their hands look kind of weird, like their palms. And they point that out, although it really has no significance in this film. But so these 2 men, they come in and they have a vacation to Westworld, and then there's like another family that has a vacation to Medieval World who's kind of glossed over, and I kind of question why they were even in it. But the 2 people who go to Westworld, they have basically the whole point, and they touch upon this much more in the show, but people go there to kill and fuck. That's why you go to Westworld. And in the show, they say that multiple times. In this movie, it's the same sort of deal. Basically, the humans go in here and they play God with these AI robots. Now, the concept there is really interesting because you can ask a lot of interesting questions about humanity, about consciousness. You can ask a lot of interesting questions about, what are the ethics of this? You can do so much. You can focus on the AI and see what differentiates the AI from a human. And what I found fascinating about this film is it doesn't do that. Like, you've got this amazing world, right? This fantastic concept. I will say that. Absolutely fantastic concept. And the movie just becomes a basic thriller in the latter third. And that's all it really amounts to. When you have these stories, you often see the scientists controlling the world. And you see as the AI start to malfunction, and eventually this AI on the poster here, who's played by somebody who was in the original Magnificent Seven, don't know his name, but he's a great Western actor. He's great in that movie, at least. And he's like the gunslinger AI. Well, basically, they're not supposed to be able to kill humans because the guns are not supposed to be able to fire on things that have body heat. Which, that doesn't make much sense because they're all in like a desert environment, so why aren't the robots hot? I don't get it. But regardless, the robots are like cold apparently, so the guns can't fire at them. Well, the gunslinger manages to start being able to kill the guests. Now, the guest had previously killed the gunslinger like 2 or 3 times, and now the gunslinger's getting revenge, I guess.
Yeah, because that's another thing to note. Basically, what happens is like the day ends, quote unquote, and then all the androids are taken back and fixed up again.
Yeah.
And like brought back out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember in the movie, do the days kind of like repeat?
That wasn't a thing that I remember seeing in the movie.
Okay, but they do go back and they like get fixed up and they like put him back out there. So like the gunslinger guy, somebody might shoot him one day and then they'll fix him back up. He'll go back out and then someone else could like have the same interaction with the character or whatever.
Yeah. So the medieval world, Roman world really doesn't come into play at all. It's just a world where everybody has sex, so I guess they didn't think there was anything relevant to show there. I imagine there may have been some deleted scenes with that place, but I don't know. Regardless, you do cut to medieval world sometimes, and it's really not paced well, and the family there is not developed at all, despite the fact that they end up kind of being central characters for like a good half the film. But when everything goes awry, you see that occur in medieval world first, where the Black Knight character ends up killing one of the guests. It's a good scene, but again, I question the necessity of having medieval world and Roman world at all. You very well could have began the murder in Westworld, and it would have had more impact because we care about the characters who are in Westworld more than I do in medieval world because they're just not developed as characters. And that being said, I like the idea that there are 3 different worlds. It just doesn't come into play very much here. It essentially it adds up to being set pieces, basically, for the gunslinger to chase around our lead actor here, is what that boils down to. And they're good set pieces. It's cool to watch the gunslinger walk through a bunch of dead Romans and, walk through a fucking castle. And that's cool. And for that matter, even the laboratory he walks through. It becomes a decent thriller movie, but again, you have to wonder, it just seems like the concept here was just completely lost. It's sort of like the first Terminator film, which is a great movie, don't get me wrong, but it's got so much lore that they pack into it, and yet by the end, the movie just becomes a thriller with like one bad guy chasing down some people, and that's it. And it's not until Terminator 2 where that, like, the underlying concept is able to be explored. And that's a very similar thing with this. So one thing I want to say before I further criticize the film is this, when I was watching this movie, I was like, wow, this is something that actually deserves a remake. Because you've got a great concept, and it's just not explored that well. And it's like a great concept that isn't done perfectly, And that is exactly when a remake should be made. Remakes shouldn't be made when the original is already brilliant, is already a classic, is already fantastic, A remake should be made when the original deserves to be expounded upon, can be done better, And this is a great example of that. Now, I will say, I think this movie's decent. There are plenty of good scenes. There are plenty of tense moments. It's a decent thriller movie. I like the lead gunslinger. I like his performance as the gunslinger. It's very memorable. But beyond that, it just feels like something more needed to happen here. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of your thoughts. And I think one thing actually that I did like a lot about this film is there was a lot of lore packed into how short of a film this was, but it was never like down your throat.
Yeah,
it was all very underplayed and understated, but you were able as a viewer to really understand what was going on. You would have they would often cut back to the scientists working on the androids or like overseeing the world. The other thing that so you mentioned that there's kind of like it almost honestly to me feels like competing stories happening here between what's going on in Westworld, which is basically like 2 guys go out. One guy's kind of like he's like a normal dude, and the other guy's like trying to get him to stop being such a Poindexter and like have sex and whatever and gamble and kill people, yeah. Right? So that's one story, which I think actually, and we'll probably get there, but is kind of a similar idea that happens with the in the show.
Yes.
But that's one story that kind of evolves. And then there's also this story where it's like a husband and wife, and then the husband like falls for one of the robots or something. And the thing about the majority of this film is like I didn't really care about either of those things, right? It was almost like the kind of what you mentioned was there's so much that they could have tapped into here with just the idea of this world, but instead the writing revolved around like them just like showing these one-off interactions between two characters that I don't really feel like flushed either of the character sets out that much. I mean, like I think back to the film and I know there's like a scene where they're all just like shooting up each other in a bar.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's like one where he's like nervously like trying to have sex with a hooker and stuff. And it's like, this really isn't adding anything. It's just all this padding that doesn't really help me understand the concept of the world or why we should care about these people that are in it. The other thing that I would mention is the reason why I really feel like they were two competing stories is, so you mentioned that one of the onsets of like everything going wrong was the Black Knight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that happens in medieval world, but then a similar event happens in Westworld where like a rattlesnake bites the guy or something. Do you remember that?
Yeah, although to be fair to that does happen before the Black Knight, so it's like it's sort of like foreshadowing. It's not like, you know, the Black Knight happens and then he gets bit by a snake.
Yeah, but what I'm saying though is it's like this just further feels to me like why even have the medieval portion?
Yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day, it becomes a set piece, and you could maybe say that's like the Black Knight was an onset event, which then you could kind of build out into the world. But no, it's like that same thing happens in the Westworld story as well with the snake. So it's like, why even have those characters or showcase that place? I don't really, it didn't really feel, and the thing is that like they weirdly hang on those two characters in this film in the medieval world, and it's like I really don't care about what's going on here.
Yeah.
I guess you kind of get more of a sense of like, okay, well, you start to try to like comprehend the ethics of this world in the sense of this is like a man who's really actually falling for one of these androids. I think she's like the queen or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Princess, I think. I don't know.
And I don't quite remember if they explore it, but I think there's always, whenever, I know the show definitely explores this concept, but there's always this overlying thought of like, well, is that reciprocated? Or is this robot just programmed to like me in this way?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so you get a sense of that, although I don't ever feel like it really flushes itself out here.
Yeah, that's the problem. A lot of the movie has a lot of wasted potential. It could have used from a lot of trimming. It's not even a long film, but it's just there's too much unnecessary stuff.
Yeah, it's just that they focus in on just the most unnecessary stuff.
So I mean, but I will say, I do think you do get a pretty solid sense of progression of the world beginning to turn on everybody, right? Like. Although I don't think you needed the Black Knight, and I think because the gunslinger scene where he kills the guy who's more familiar with the place, you know, that was that could have been just fine. That was a pretty scary scene, so that could have worked just fine. But we already knew it was going to happen going into it because we already know that they're beginning to kill people now. So that being said, you get a good sense of progression. It does start to feel like it's going out of control to the point where the actual when the movie really kicks into high gear, it becomes a lot more interesting and a lot more investing. But it's just not really that well executed, you know. It's got a lot of good elements, it's got a good concept, and I almost feel like this film is driven by its concept more than anything else. Like, if you didn't have a great concept here, what you've got is a very mediocre thriller film. It's just set in such a cool environment that it kind of makes it work, but it's just not that fantastic. And I mean, if you want to look at a movie where a theme park kills everybody, fucking Michael Crichton did that better later anyway.
I will echo, though, I do feel like once the thriller portion of this film sets in, which I would say is probably the final, maybe not even a third, honestly.
Yeah, it's like the final third.
Where they're getting chased down by the gunmen, and you have some really cool set pieces, but you also have some fun deconstruction of the character as he like gets like he starts to get hacked up and you can see into his like robot parts and stuff. I did think that was done well, and it was fun to watch, especially because, as you mentioned, like walking through the Roman world and the medieval world were interesting, but I just didn't feel like that was enough to really, hold this film up as an entire piece of media.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to wrap this up if you don't mind, because I want to get into the show. I think that's a bigger deal here. This movie's all right. I'd give it a 6. It's okay. There's, good set pieces, great concept, good performance from the gunslinger here. But overall, it's just kind of it's a very slogging movie with too many ideas and not enough focus. And that's kind of my overall issue. And also, Michael Crichton, just not a very good director. Like, the directing in this film is not that good. There are a lot of, and even the editing, there are a lot of unnecessary shots. There are a lot of unnecessary extra angles and just a lot of stuff. It feels amateur. It really does. Not as if it was not made by a studio, because it's a big production for sure, but the directing just feels amateur. So yeah, but it's a 6. It's okay. It's a decent thriller. That's about all I can say for it.
Yep, and I would give it the same score, a 6. I would just add, if you are a huge fan of the show, I do think it is kind of fun to go back to this just to see, because you already mentioned it, and I'm sure that's where we're going here. The core idea is just so good for of what this is. And so it is kind of fun to go back and see how it kind of started. I don't think it's a must watch by any means. It is, as like a whole film, as you and I mentioned, probably about a 6 or so. But if you are a fan of the show, I think it's kind of fun to just kick it on and check it out.
Yeah, and like I said, it's decent. It's not bad. I enjoyed it okay. All right, so that brings us to the Westworld TV show, an HBO show. So I've heard a lot about this. I've heard a lot that this is super great and everything like that. I assumed that was probably correct. So I watched season 1, just for the record. I don't know if we said that, but it's just season 1, because I think season 2... Has season 2 even started yet? I think it started.
No, 22nd.
Oh, okay. So, okay. Well, then, yeah. Then that's all we could have watched. So let's see. Last episode, I talked about something that I want to intro this review talking about, even though I don't think it sums up my overall thoughts on this. But I want to mention it anyway, because it's something that probably holds me back. I talked about when we talked about Riverdale, and granted, that show is definitely worse than this, significantly. And that kind of goes without saying. That's obvious. But I mentioned something. I don't know if I gave it a name, but it's this sort of like I talked about how that show showed me why I have never been the biggest fan of live action TV shows, because it made me really notice the amount of just honestly carelessness that goes into many of the essential elements that people look for when they critically analyze a film. For example, I'm talking cinematography, editing. Sometimes even set design, especially lighting, just so much of the visual aspect of this kind of entertainment is overlooked in far too many TV shows. And it's because people look for that story. They look for good performances. They look for that gripping story. And Westworld absolutely has that, which we'll get into, of course. I'm not putting up the spoiler tag just yet, but as soon as you start talking about the story, it's going up, because there's nothing I can't spoil. But Westworld, sadly, I believe suffers from the exact same problem, in that for the majority of this show, and then for the episodes that had more significance, everything tended to get better all around, which I found interesting. But for a lot of the show, it's got the same problem. The shot-to-shot editing is not good. It's not terrible, but it's not good. There are a lot of really bad close-up shots. I mean, just a ridiculous amount of extreme tights that look fucking terrible. And they're done with no purpose or thought. A lot of shot, reverse shot kind of stuff that could have had more interesting angles every now and again to break it up. I mean, and every time when they do have a really beautiful shot, it's cut away from too quickly. Stuff like that, baseline stuff. I mean, the show doesn't look particularly great. The set design's phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. But it's shot like a fucking TV show. It's lit like a TV show. It doesn't look... This is not the kind of thing that I could see on the big screen. If you put this on the big screen, I don't know that this would get the absolutely overwhelmingly positive reception that it has. Because it looks generic. It looks generic, and it's edited generically, and that holds me back. And that is where my critique of Westworld basically begins and ends, and we'll put the spoilers up. Because, man, when it comes down to taking the concept from the movie and doing everything right with that concept, and from a story perspective, this show almost, like, nails that almost perfectly. Like, all of the concepts you can explore, all of the topics you can explore, they are explored in this show. And explored well. They're explored well. There's a lot of interesting dynamics here, a lot of interesting ethical questions, to the point where by the end of this show, you're wondering, you're genuinely wondering who is in the right. Despite the fact that the show does have, like, at least 2 villains, by the end of the show, you're like, I don't know who I'm rooting for anymore. And it's just, man, like, there's a lot to go into. I was talking for a little bit, Steven. Go ahead and I'll kind of bounce ideas off of you. What are some of the, like, most interesting things that you think happen in this show, and we can kind of just go from there?
Gosh, I want to just get this out of the way first and foremost. I adore this show. Top to bottom, I just love this thing. I cannot state that enough. I think that, first of all, I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I'm not really a fan of Westerns, but the way that this film integrates those two concepts, or the way that the show integrates those two concepts, and I could have talked about this with the film as well, but the way that the show integrates those two concepts is brilliant. And And you mentioned it, the way that it really explores the ethical considerations, because this show, it is an HBO show, so it gets very gory and it gets very graphic, and there's a lot of nudity. In fact, in one episode, it's just this giant orgy.
It's pretty. It gets relatively pornographic in certain.
Yeah,
scenes.
It gets very pornographic. Yeah. But it does so for a purpose.
Yes,
because and the movie explored it a little bit. The idea of, okay, well, this is really more a playground for sex and violence, and you start to kind of wonder, and that raises a lot of ethical concerns. Well, this show, the way that it presents those ideas and uses the characters, both android and non-android, to explore those themes and those concepts, you have... So I'll mention the orgy scene, right? You have flesh and blood characters that go into this room where everyone is just having these giant orgies, and they have to think about that. But at the same time, you have this android who we are to assume is cold and unfeeling and just pretends like it doesn't exist. But they also have to deal with the repercussions of what's happening in a way that becomes very interesting as the show goes on, and you start to learn more about their potential intelligence and what that might mean for the world. So I know we'll get there, but I think one of the more interesting things about this first season is the way that it really, because this is a show that now will have a second season, as we mentioned, starts on April 22nd. What this first season does so well is, for the whole first season, you're really getting that world building and that exploration of the dynamic between the characters and the ethical concerns and considerations that are here, and the morality of the choices that these characters are making. And you're doing so all in the context of this mystery, I guess you could call it, with, like, trying to understand, okay,
the maze.
Like the maze, and these robots are starting to kind of, like, remember things that are happening, and what does that mean? And you have these characters who are interconnected and then become very, very, very closely interconnected when they turn out to be the same character, which is probably the biggest unveil. Top to bottom, every second of this, I just loved for the first season.
Well, I definitely wish I could share your overwhelming enthusiasm, but I will say, you know, one problem there, and I don't want to be the one who just goes through all the problems because I like this show a lot. So I don't want to do that, but I'm probably gonna have to because you love this so much. So I mean, like, if I don't want to just bounce positives off of you exclusively because I'm not overwhelmingly positive. So if I sound like I'm negative on the show, I am not. I'll try to get to some positives later on. But I do want to say one problem I did have, especially as the show went on, although towards the end most of the better episodes were in the latter half of the first season. But you know, because there's so many interconnected puzzles going on here, like there's so many unanswered questions for so much of this, and they are answered, which is great. But like, so you're jumping around in timelines. You like a lot of the time, it maybe this show gets no, not maybe. I will say this show gets a little too convoluted at points because they have so many questions they want to answer. Thankfully, all the questions come together and they're all related to each other, and that's great. And that's what I wanted to see. But still, throughout the show, I mean, it doesn't really know when to put focus on the different storylines. Like, there are like 4 or 5, and as the thing goes on, just multiple storylines packing on top of each other. You've got the storyline very similar to the film, where there's one guy who's kind of ambivalent about the place, and the other guy's been there a lot, and he loves killing, and the other guy doesn't like to see him kill people, you know, and he thinks his friend, or like, they're both working together in the same company, or like his higher up, I have no fucking clue. He thinks he's an asshole, right? And he doesn't want him to kill these AI. This guy sees these AIs as like humans, basically, and the other one does not. So that's one story. Then you've got the story which turns out to be, spoilers up, turns out to be the guy who was initially ambivalent. He is now in the present time this evil he wants to be this villain who just slaughters and rapes, and he does all these horrible things to these AI, despite the fact his name is William. When William was, you know, in the initial story, in the original story, he was like, he was really kind and caring, but he essentially learned not to be that way. And that's another story. But keep in mind, these two stories are playing at the same time as if they're happening at the same time throughout most of the show. So it's like 2 stories stacked on top of each other.
And it comes to a head in basically the reveal episode, where you're jumping between these different points in time in the same episode repeatedly as a way to reveal that they are one and the same.
Yeah. Again, which is clever, but the problem is you've also, what's another story you've got? You've got Dolores.
Yep, Dolores is probably the big one.
She's like the central story here who kind of ends up connecting everything together. She is this very, you know, this very kind android. She's like a daughter. She's like a do-gooder kind of girl. And she basically just exists to fall for the good guy. That's her entire purpose. Well, it turns out that's not her real purpose, but that's her purpose within the context of the park. You've got this story with this guy who's making storylines, and he's kind of a ditz. And that's another story that's happening. You've also got this story with Bernard, who is the head of behavior, is it? In the lab, where like he is the head of working with these androids to make sure that they're not questioning their existence too much. They're not gonna harm a guest. And then you've also got this story with the creator of the whole park named Robert Ford, who is basically a villain, and he continues to turn out to be a villain. Who had a business partner. If this sounds confusing, it's because it is. He had a business partner named Arnold. Arnold turns out to Arnold was dead, but Bernard is a recreation of Arnold. I still don't know why. Just cause I guess. And Arnold, like, he hated the park and wanted to destroy it from within. It remains an open question for a lot of the show as to whether Robert killed him or not. It turns out that was not the case. Dolores actually killed him because he programmed Dolores to kill him. And I'm losing myself here. There's so much shit to focus on.
You also have Maeve.
Maeve, right? That's right. Maeve is like the head of the prostitutes, basically, and she ends up wanting to break free and escape. She learns of her situation. She wakes up while she's being worked on between nights. You know, like in the film we said, they come and they fix up the robots every night when they die. Well, she learns how to wake up, and she
Which God is brilliant, by the way.
Yeah,
that scene when that happens.
I really enjoy her story.
Because the other thing is, and you kind of touched on it with the writer and Ford, who is the creator, but there's kind of this meta narrative, like it's not focused on, but there is this meta narrative where you like are sometimes in the park and following things that are happening within the park, and then you're sometimes outside of the park at Delos, I think is what it's called, right? Delos?
I don't know.
Is the company. Well, sometimes you're at the company following the characters in the company, either the people like reprogramming the bots or them looking at the world from like above and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so Maeve, she wants to escape. It turns out Robert programmed her to do that, or somebody did. I saw Robert's name in the code, so I don't know if they said it, but I saw it. And like she has a breakout with all the robots, and a very great scene, by the way, where they all just start shooting all the soldiers. And there are probably other ones that I'm forgetting. There's so much that happens in the course of these 10 episodes, and you know, I very much appreciate the way that the show makes them all come together. Although it does sort of get into the point with a lot of these twists where it's just sitting there and explaining it for like 10 minutes because there's so much shit going on that you can't have these twists revealed any more subtly than that. And I'm fine with them explaining it. You know, Robert Ford and Anthony Hopkins' performance is fantastic. You almost don't even realize that the show's just sitting there and explaining everything to you because he's so good in his role. You know, he seems so authoritative and he's so like cunning and manipulative, and it's just he's great. Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins, which I guess this is an Anthony Hopkins themed show because he was also the narrator of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. But Anthony Hopkins, his interaction with the actor who plays Bernard, anytime those two are together just talking to each other, it is so interesting to watch.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, but anyway, all I'm trying to say is that I think because the show wants to do so much and has to connect it, it ends up getting convoluted. There are a lot of moments, and during the entire Arnold twist, I was just starting to get lost because there's so much stuff to think about. And I'm just like, okay, I know what the twist is, but why? Why did you do this? Why did you rebuild Arnold? And, also, not only why did you rebuild Arnold, but how does this connect to everything else? How is this even relevant? I was just totally lost because there's so much stuff to think about, and there's like so much stuff to focus on. There was one twist that I absolutely fucking adored in what I think was the best episode of the show. Maybe people won't agree with me. What was it? Trompe l'oeil? What's the name of the episode? I'll find it. But it's the episode where it's revealed that Bernard is an android. Right? This twist was delivered so phenomenally. Like I was just I was blown away by this twist. It was fantastic. And when it happened, you think back to all the things you saw and you're like, holy shit, it all makes sense now. Like, but the problem is after this twist, now you're just piling twist after twist after twist, and the twists begin to get more convoluted until the final episode where, you know, it makes sense. And I guess I just think maybe, and I don't know how they would have done this, but maybe we could have used from cutting one of these stories out. I don't know which one, but maybe that could have been a benefit. You know, maybe, and even though I love so many of the scenes in this story, the story between the two business partners, who, you know, one of them being William, who turns out to be the villain, really a lot of the narrative purpose of this was simply to be a twist. You know, sure, it gives you backstory to William in a really interesting way, and it shows you here was William's reasoning for doing what he was doing. It turns out he's not just this completely evil man. He actually wanted to set the androids free all along. Same thing with Robert, by the way. And, you know, that was revealed interestingly, but still, having this extra storyline, making the timelines get so confused and convoluted at a certain point, I wonder if it was worth it. Like, even though I liked so much of that, I wonder if this was a necessary element, I guess. And same thing with a few other storylines here. Maybe something could have been cut. I will say this show does not suffer from the same issue of a lack of focus as the film does. Even though there's so much stuff, it all does seem to come together into a cohesive finale that makes sense. That being said, I still wonder if all of it was necessary. I still wonder if we needed all of these subplots, you know, despite the fact that they were written so well and there were so many great scenes. I think maybe it made this show a little too packed, in my opinion. That
Yeah, I
being,
think
no.
the one thing about that, which I think is interesting, is it's like, and maybe we'll table this for now, but like, how do they then take what happened and unfolded here, where they created all these thread lines that came back together at the end? How do they now go forward? Is what I'm curious to find out. So that's why I'm very excited for the next season.
Well, that's definitely a concern for me, though, as I mean, this first season works remarkably well as a contained product. You know, even though the finale is open-ended, it's also kind of not. Like, if this show ended at season 1, it would be perfectly satisfactory, I think.
Yeah, honestly, I think so. I for whatever reason I was in, I guess, an AI related media mood when I had started watching this because I had just come off of seeing Ex Machina,
Uh-huh.
right? And if you end this show, if you just say Westworld was one season and it ends like it does, it would be very similar to Ex Machina in the way that you subtly hint at, okay, I won't spoil Ex Machina, but
Yeah.
I will say that like the you could have ended it here and just subtly, very subtly hinted at who knows what will happen.
Yeah. And it's not even just that, but I think you can fill in the blanks, you know? Through the way that the stories came together, I think you can fill in the blanks. I think by Robert saying I'm doing this to set you free and then Dolores kills him, I really think that says everything you need. Like that says this is going to turn around. Like I don't think I want to know what's going to happen if the AIs go out into the real world. I don't care about that. Like that's just extra bullshit. And I know that if the show continues for multiple seasons, you're going to get that eventually. I don't want any of that. Like maybe some people will want that, but I don't. I don't know if I will watch season 2. I might start it, but I just don't know that this needs that extra. I don't know that this needs anything more. But it does a good job of allowing itself to continue. It's not like it's completely closed off. I don't know.
Although I will say the one thing that I would be excited for if they were to go in that direction, where at least one of these characters goes out into the real world. If I were to pick any of them, I would probably pick Maeve to be one to do it. Which I think actually she tries to, right? And then she goes back.
Yeah, she goes back. She gets on the train and then she gets back off the train. And it's not explained why she does this. I think it's like an open end, but it does. You do know that she was on a story path.
No, it's something. It's for her daughter, right? Because she's still trying to find.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, she wants to see her daughter. Yeah, that's right. Because she opens up the path. She's like, "That's my daughter," in the thing. Yeah. But
so if I were to guess any of them to do it, I still probably would peg her to do it. I think where that then becomes interesting is then you start to understand. Now you have these androids who have hyper intelligent AI, right? And how does that interact with a world? Because before they were reacting with people, but they were acting with people in the confines of Westworld, right? But if you bring her into the real world now, how do those interactions play out?
Yeah.
How do people in the real world, do they learn that she's an AI? Would anyone ever know? I'd be curious to see what they would do with that in that case.
Yeah, but I just don't know that it's something that I personally want to see. I'm not saying they couldn't do it well. Let's see. What I want to say about this. There's a lot to say because I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in here. I mean, the story is fantastic and it's interwoven in a really smart and God, I say that word all the time in a very clever way. But I have to question the necessity of everything that's placed in here. Let's see. What else can I say about this? Yeah. So the twists. I mean, man, the Arnold one. I knew there was going to be a twist with Arnold. I don't know if I knew it was going to play out the way it did, and I'm not really happy with the way it played out because it still makes no sense to me. Why did he rebuild Arnold? For what purpose? Like, because Arnold was not an AI. He died, and now he's an AI who doesn't even know he's Arnold, who has the memory of Arnold, but that's it. Beyond that, what does he have anything to do with Arnold? Why did he rebuild Arnold? Like, why? Was it just so that we could have a twist where he's like, "You're Arnold, holy shit." And then I was just like, wait, but I thought Arnold was dead. And yes, Arnold was dead. He was an AI who was built after Arnold for no reason that I can gather. So that's kind of weird. Another thing that really makes no sense to me, and you can correct me if they brought this up.
So my understanding of that one, first of all, I think in general Robert Ford's character sometimes makes these very nonsensical decisions, but they never feel like they are nonsensical. Does that make sense?
But this one did.
Right. Well, I mean, in the sense that like if he just rebuilt Arnold just because he was like, I want Arnold back in my life, I would have not questioned it. But I think primarily the reason why he did so was to expedite Dolores, because Dolores had multiple and recurring interactions with Arnold who continually tried to unlock her artificial intelligence. So my understanding was that the reason why he quote unquote recreated Arnold was again to continue to get Dolores to the point of expanding her thought.
But again, there was also a reveal, or at least a hint, that all those interactions we saw Bernard have with Dolores was actually from the past with Arnold and Dolores, and wasn't actually happening in the now. So even if that's true, that still wasn't Bernard doing that. At least if it was Bernard doing that, that was not telegraphed, because now I have no fucking clue who it was, because it already showed that we can go back in time at any point and make it look like the present, and you wouldn't know the difference. So I don't understand. I see what you're saying, but again, I'm like, did that play into the story ultimately? I don't know if it did.
Even still, if those interactions were in the past, Dolores and Bernard have interactions in the present. They're not the same interactions, but they do have interactions in the present. So I still think that there's some thread there potentially.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It to me, it just seemed kind of pointless. But I guess
I'm not sure.
Again, also, what else? Okay, so one thing about the world that makes no sense to me. Again, correct me if I'm wrong if they said anything about this early on in the show and I didn't pick up on it because I wasn't questioning it yet. That's very possible. So the entire world kind of started to fall apart for me when I questioned something. I hope this was answered. So every day the world repeats, right? Then how come the stories that people are having with these AIs are continuing day to day? There aren't multiple of each AI. There's only one Dolores. So how come when Dolores goes with for example, the business partner, she follows them over the course of several days, and yet also simultaneously every day she's re-beginning her story?
Yeah.
And they're taking her out of the world too every night. But then there are scenes in the night where the robots are... So when are they taking Dolores? And when are they putting her back at the beginning? And when are they falling? Because she's going in every single day, right? Like, it's not like they just leave her out when she's on a story path. If to my understanding, she does go back every single day.
So from what I remember, and I don't know if they explicitly answer that question or not, but I do remember at one point they make some mention of one of the characters being on a story thread, right? And basically they let that character remain to be on the story thread because I don't know if you remember, but like I have this vague recollection of there's this point where they're all camped up, right? And the flesh and blood people go to sleep and they actually get those characters from camp and then bring them back to the same camp the next day. So my understanding was that in certain situations, they do allow basically like story events to unfold in the world. So Dolores doesn't always necessarily start at like her dad's house and goes out to the city, right? Because the other thing is, if you remember, they have basically swap-ins, right? So like they'll have like swap-ins of the prostitutes where
right, but that's like when one of them malfunctions.
It's the same character, but it's like a different thing. So that also could be the case where there's like always a Dolores, but it's not the Dolores we know, if that makes sense. Like that character is still. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember it being explicitly explained. So I'm not sure.
You could be right.
You watched it more recently too.
Yeah,
so
it just again I could have forgotten something in there, but it just seemed odd to me. It seems like a very, very confusing world, and like a world that wasn't quite world built enough, maybe. But sure, you know, it didn't hinder my enjoyment too much. It was just something that was kind of in the back of my mind where I was just like, what's going on? How? Why? But again, there was so much timeline intersection that honestly they could have just like it could have been like, okay, you know, Yeah, I don't even know. There was so many stuff going on at once that wasn't actually happening at the same time that it was so hard to tell at some point. So I guess looking back on it, it's very possible that if you added everything up, given the timelines, then it made perfect sense. But again, it's just another problem with having so many timelines. It does get convoluted, I think. Let's see. Do I have any other like major things I wanted to say? Because a lot of the positive aspects that you touched on are basically the kind of things that I really enjoyed about it. Performances are all around fantastic as well. That's a big thing that I wanted to point out. I liked the final episode quite a bit. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to say, the music. Why was there so much Radiohead? There's like, so they have like piano playing like other songs. There is a theme, but everything else like another song, and a lot of it was Radiohead. That was confusing. That was weird. That's just, I don't know. It's not really that relevant, but I was just like, why are they playing Radiohead in the piano bar?
You're right.
There was a lot of radio, and then in the score they also had more Radiohead transcriptions that weren't even piano. Like when Maeve was walking and seeing the bodies, they were playing like a transcription of motion picture soundtrack. That was odd. I did not understand that. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, so again, main critique with this is it suffers from the same TV show syndrome that I've come to get familiar with, of shows that don't have a style beyond their story. And that's, I think, if you continue to recommend TV shows to me, which I hope you do, because I'm enjoying watching them. I don't really watch TV shows ever, and this is why. I have a feeling that this is going to be a consistent, recurring problem I'm going to have with them, because there are a few TV shows I've found where I was like, man, that really has a sense of style that's really drawing me back. So I mean, we'll see about that, but I don't know. Yeah, no, it's a great story. There were some really fantastic episodes. Like I said, the Trompe l'Oeil is the name of it, where Bernard turns out to be an android. That entire episode was fantastic. And I remember a lot of, like I said, on some of the more important episodes, a lot of these like presentation problems got better, but only for the course of those episodes, as if they knew they needed to really hone it for those episodes. That was a weird thing I noticed, but fine, I'll take that, because some of those episodes were really great. Finale episode wrapped everything up really well. I loved the final scene where Dolores kills Robert Ford. Phenomenal scene.
Yeah, she goes up to Teddy and she goes, "This world was made for us, Teddy."
Yeah. I absolutely adored as well the scene where Dolores is talking to herself as a reveal that what they've really been searching for within themselves was indeed just to be able to know that it was their own thoughts, and like not the thoughts of Arnold, not the thoughts of a coding machine. It was them, I loved the way that was revealed. That was really well done. And although the timeline intersection got confusing, it did keep the story interesting, and it kept you questioning what exactly was going on in a way that made the story more engaging. And there were a handful of other really entertaining scenes here and there throughout the show that I could go through if I remembered them, but I don't remember all of them.
And another small thing to note is, so from the film, there were the three worlds, although it was called Westworld. There was Westworld, there was Medieval World, and there was Roman World. In the show, they exclusively focus on Westworld until I think the last episode where you start to get hints at samurai AIs from other worlds, like there's some samurai fighting.
Yeah, and I saw like an SW, so like a samurai world. That was cool. I was like, wow, that's actually neat. And it wasn't overbearing. It was like an homage to the original film, Which again is something I'm kind of upset about, because I bet in the second season they're going to go into that. And I hope I liked it as like a little homage that just expanded the world, and it was neat. It was a neat way to tie it back to the film in a way. Even though Samurai World was not one of the worlds, it was still like, look, there are still multiple worlds here, right? Which was cool. But yeah, all around better than the movie. I think that's pretty easy to say that. It really uses this concept to its full, a much greater extent than the movie did, and it doesn't have a defined good guy and bad guy like the movie did. So I think just all around superior.
Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit, but even the Man in Black, who you just grow to hate, like he is easily portrayed as a simple villain. You know his motivation and his intention.
Well, you think you do.
You'd think you do.
Yeah.
Even he, at the end of all of this, you question: is he really the villain here?
Yeah, and
Ford. For most of this show, Ford is like weirdly cunning and definitely seems like he could have murdered Arnold, or he's up to something.
He straight up murders 2 people. Like, it's not like it's even a question. I mean, well, he uses Bernard to do it, but still, like,
right.
He's fucking killing people. Like, the dude, look, regardless of his good intention, or like, you can think about, is this a good intention anyway? We know that he's still not a good or a bad guy. Like, the ethical questions are gray, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, do you think we should wrap it up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Okay, yeah, so final thoughts. I would give this show overall probably a very strong 7. Bordering on an 8. I think that presentation-wise, it's just generic. The shots aren't great. Editing's not great. And the story gets a little convoluted to the point where I think it maybe could have been worked on a little bit. The pacing between these stories is not always the best. I remember an entire episode where one story just was not present. It was the episode where like we really started to focus on Maeve, and I don't think you got a single scene with the 2 business partners. And then they came back in the next episode. So it didn't quite know how to pace the stories. That being said, the concept here is more than just a concept. It's actually realized, and it's fascinating too. And there are, like I said, those tons of moral gray area that really make you question things, that like actually make you think. Twists that are surprising, but like well built up to. They're not like the Arnold one confuses me. That one was kind of unnecessary, but God, Bernard being an android, and then like all the twists that are revealed in the final episode are great, and they're done with so much wit and tact. The maze as a concept is fascinating, and it turns out to be a lot more philosophical than you would have thought early on. And just the world building, like how there's tons of storylines, and how the people at management think about this park, and how the guests think about this park, and all of this extra stuff. And I mean, there's so much here that's really, really, really great. And again, I still question, if we had this in a theater, would it get the overwhelmingly positive reception it has received in this way? I don't believe so. Because I think when you put it in the context of a movie, people tend to see these problems more. And that's something that has bothered me as I've watched some live action shows. I know that TV is being told that people say it's getting better. It's beginning to like win over film. I don't see that yet. And I would like it to get there, but people are going to need to, I think that's going to require people to say, look, we need to hold this to the exact same standards we hold a film to. We're not just holding it to, this is a great story with great concepts and great characters and great acting, because all that stuff's super important. And to most people, it's the most important thing. I think in a lot of contexts, for me, it's the most important thing. But of course, it depends on director intent. But that doesn't mean that the generic TV show production is going to cut it for these stories. These stories could use more. Westworld could use some gorgeous, breathtaking cinematography, and it doesn't have it. At least it doesn't have a lot of it. It could use some really grounded lighting, and a lot of times it doesn't have that. It could use an amazing soundtrack, and again, it doesn't really have that. And that was disappointing to me. However, if you think you're the kind of person who generally overlooks that, I think you're going to absolutely fucking adore this. I think this is going to be I think this could be one of your favorite shows, because there's just so much here to like, and so many fucking great scenes. So would I recommend it? Yes. But it depends on your critical eye, because I felt myself disappointed a decent amount of the time with this, to be honest, despite the fact that I really enjoyed it. I found myself wishing for more. I found myself thinking that certain scenes would have been better if they had been done in a different way, and just on and on and on. So take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But yes, I absolutely do recommend this show.
Yeah, and I would give this a big old 10, baby. My favorite part is when they find out Bruce Willis was an android the whole time. All right, let's move on.
Wait, seriously? So you'd give this a 10? Why?
Yeah, so I'd give it a 10. I think we touched on it. I think for me, top to bottom, I loved it. I think that the characters are just so great, and the acting is so well done that it's just such an enjoyable ride. There are definitely some scenes that I think are, if you're someone who does not like gore, there are some very gory scenes in this.
It's an HBO show. Just say that.
It's an HBO. Yeah, it's an HBO show. But like, even when I stack this up against Game of Thrones, I would still say this at points gets to be more pornographic and more gory. But I don't think that detracts from, and I actually think it adds to the point and the theme of what they're going for here. I think that the core concept is brilliant. The writing is brilliant. It was fun to watch all the threads expand and then come together at the end. And the way that it wraps up is really interesting, and I think very well sets up a next season. So I'm curious to see where they go from here. But just thinking of this season as a standalone, definitely one of my favorite shows probably ever.
So I want to ask very briefly, though, because it's a thing, I feel like I'm going to mention a lot throughout the course of this podcast as more TV shows come up. I'm just curious, because we didn't, you didn't really say, like, do you think I am wrong about what I'm saying? Like, do you think that TV is being held to the same standard of film in the regards of presentation and production and overall visuals and cinematography?
No, I don't think so, but I don't think that it needs to be, because if you think of the budget of this thing and the budget of film, and then the length at which both of these both run and are developed, not to say it's easy, but it is much easier to be very smart about the production of a film when you are holding yourself to a film's length and runtime. In this case, obviously each episode to episode could be that same runtime or shorter. So it's not like it's impossible, but there's so much to pack in that I think when I think of a television show, I'm not so focused on the way that it's visually presented as in the way that it's shot or the way that it's lit, because I think that HBO shows are probably the closest you are going to get. And I think this is the closest you will get in that regard. And then probably second being, I mentioned it, Game of Thrones, especially in the more recent seasons. I think that production values of individual episodes are allowing them to get much closer to some of the shots and some of the lighting and other production features that would go into a film.
So in other words, I'm going to be consistently let down.
You will be consistently. Yes. If you did not think that this met standards, then you're never going to get there.
I will say this, to your point about them having less of a budget, I absolutely wholeheartedly understand that that's the reason for this. However, I don't accept that as an excuse, because there are films that have had lower budgets than the Westworld TV show that probably look better. Think about like your standard indie art house films that look better. They're more visually interesting. Of course, they're more daring, and I wouldn't want Westworld to go in a direction like that. But still, I don't think it requires a huge budget to have great or stylistic cinematography. Look at Stranger Things, all right? Because that is a show that I watched all the way through on my own volition. Not season 2. I didn't even get past the first episode. But season 1, I watched it through my own volition, and for the longest time, I was like, why the hell did I do that? I never watched live action shows. And again, it was Riverdale that made me realize why I did that. Because Stranger Things, it had its issues here and there, and the CGI looked fucking god awful. But that's something I much more chalk up to the lack of budget than I do the style of the way the show was presented. As in, it had a really distinct, like, here is what we want stylistically for this show, and it stuck to it. And for that reason, it was just so much more entertaining to me. And sure, the style was basically just, we're going to make this show as if it were a show that were made in the 80s. People say it's nostalgia bait, but it really isn't. They don't do a lot of that in at least in that season. It was just, that was like a presentation that the show could fit under, which meant the score could fit into that. The lighting could fit into that. The shot composition could fit into that, so that everything came together into a unique stylistic package. In the same way that the reason I think I just prefer to watch cartoons on TV, because their presentation is inherently interesting. It's inherently different, and you inherently have to do something fascinating with it. So when we come to something like this, I simply don't know that I can accept that, I can just chalk that up to having a lower budget.
I guess I just don't. I look past it. I don't think
that's fine.
I don't think a television show's primary objective is to present things in a way that are visually interesting, like a film might.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, the reason why you would watch long form media like a television show is because you get much more, you have much more of an ability to stretch your characters and your story and your world. And I don't think that the production value of this thing, which I disagree. I think that the production value of this thing is quite high. Now, I would agree that there are now, like, all the shots are not necessarily spectacular, but I can think of a lot of really great shots in this show. But I don't think that's like the primary objective or even the primary benefit of this medium. I think that the primary benefit is the story building aspect and the way that is then woven into the visual fidelity and the characters, the world itself, the sets, the design. So I don't know.
That's fine. I mean, agree to disagree on that. I have no problem that you overlook it. I can't, and I don't know if I ever will be able to. But anyway, I think we should move on to the recommendation. Steven, I guess you can go first, or no, shit. I should go first because we did my recommendation first last time. So I'm going to recommend an album by Pink Floyd. This album is called A Momentary Lapse of Reason. This was the first album by Pink Floyd after Roger Waters left the band. Roger Waters, I'm sure you know his name, but he's the mastermind behind albums like Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, The Wall, and especially The Final Cut. And then he left the band, and David Gilmour, the guitarist, since their second album, he basically became the mastermind. And this is their first record from 1987 without Roger Waters. I won't say anything more, and then you can give your rec.
Okay. I recommend to you a game called Frog Fractions. Frog Fractions is a browser game. Came out in 2012. It was developed by Twinbeard Studios, who's like pretty much just one guy, although now I think there are a couple employees of the studio. And that is the only thing I'm going to tell you about it, because if I try to explain it at all, it would probably spoil.
Okay,
so
that was the same thing with the... Okay, all right, great. So, housekeeping, we do have something to say. I'll just... next episode is the big 1-0, baby. Woo! Get
that perfect 10.
The perfect 10.
Reviews are in already. It's number 10 out of 10.
Get those kazoos, get those streamers, get your balloons. It's a party.
The air horns are ready.
We're having a party. And like we promised, it will be your chance, your time to shine. And
your time is now.
For next episode,
as the great Jonathan Cena once said, your time is now.
Moving past that, it is your time to shine. So everybody, we want you to give us your recs and have them ready for next episode, because next episode, the recommendation segment is going to be a little different. We're going to look at the chat. You guys will just, as many recs as you fucking want. It doesn't need to be one per person. Who cares? Just give your recs. What do you want us to look at? And we will decide which one we will do. So, like, I'll look through and say, okay, I'll do that one. And Steven will look through and say, I'll do that one. Now, the rules of your rec should be similar to ours. You know, we're a little lenient. We've learned that we could be more lenient than we initially thought. But as like a general rule, it should be something that we can reasonably finish within 2 weeks, given a otherwise busy schedule, right? Because Steven has a busy schedule. I don't. But Steven has a busy schedule, so you kind of have to keep that in mind. So
Yeah, and I would say with the reasonably finished portion, I would mention that like reasonably finished, but we do try to pay very close attention while we're watching, listening, whatever. So that includes taking notes. So that usually means either a very intent couple of hours or maybe a listen or two of an album. So.
Yeah, if it's an album, it will need to have time for like multiple listens. So, so keep that in mind. But yeah, come up with your recs and we're excited to see them. Obviously, if your rec doesn't really fit the rules, we just won't pick it, so it's not a big deal. But do try to keep that in mind as you're thinking of things to recommend to us. And
and sorry to do this, but I want to go ahead and be honest with our audience and kind of part the curtain here.
Oh dear.
So the audience doesn't know this, but actually all of our recommendations come from an algorithm. And our algorithm's broken, so we need your help.
Steven, damn it! We weren't supposed to tell them this!
I know.
I told you episode 10 was the party! It was the party, now you're making it a funeral!
The algorithm got smart, and it's broken free.
No!
Anthony Hopkins is coming back from How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and he's angry.
That was in his most famous role, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Yeah, so anyway, I think we're excited to see that, I would say. And I can't speak for Steven. Maybe he is absolutely dreading it, But we'll see.
I'm excited to watch some people's YouTube channels, so that's all I'll say.
Yeah, and all that stuff. Listen, here's what's up. So we have agreed basically not books. I mean, I guess if it's like a fucking children's book, then, that's doable. But not really. It's too much. But like TV shows, like a season of a TV show is fine. If you want to give like various episodes from a TV show as opposed to a full season, that's fine too. Just be specific. If your rec has like its own theme, that's cool. Whatever you want. Games are fine as long as they're relatively short or as long as you can get a feel for them by only playing them for a certain amount of time. What else? YouTube channels, yeah, those are up for we only did one so far. Steven gave me Giraffe one time, but if you want to do that, go for it. And yeah, I think that's pretty much.
We haven't got into podcasts yet, other podcasts, but I guess that's on the table as well.
If you want to, yeah,
albums, movies, TV shows, as Lewis mentioned, games. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty open.
Yeah. However, if you recommend me to travel around the world, that might not be so doable.
Yeah, I'm looking for a new washer dryer, so if you want to...
I recommend you purchase from Sears. We're not sponsored by Sears.
But we could be, Sears, if you're listening.
Listen, we're open to shill like it's never been. Get wrecked. We will absolutely sell out. Don't take us for granted, corporations. We will sell out in a heartbeat.
Easily.
Anyway, so Steven, do you have anything else?
We'll recommend every one of the DC Cinematic Universe films if Warner Brother wants to get up on this. That's all I'm saying.
So, yeah, Steven, do you have anything else to say housekeeping-wise, or do you think we're done?
No, I think that's it.
All right, well, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.